Dr. Fuhrman, during your lecture today, you used the term G-bombs, and to mention greens, beans, onions, mushrooms.
I thought it was a curse word.
The one question, I guess, is in terms of whole grains, and let's break them into two groups. Let's say quinoa, millet, amaranth, buckwheat, wild rice, and teff, all grains that I believe don't have gluten. And then another category, let's call glutinous grains that like wheat, barley, and oats. Why in your G-bombs are you not mentioning those non-glutinous whole grains? Wouldn't they also, like beans, be part of a healthy diet? And then what about grains such as wheat, barley, and oats?
Right. You're misinterpreting my point of the G-bombs, which I'm glad you're asking the question so I have a chance to clarify. I'm not saying your diet should only consist of G-bombs. I'm using the acronym G-bombs so you remember the foods that have the most association with prevention of cancer in the scientific literature. And I want you to remember to eat them regularly. That's not saying you don't eat other foods that are not G-bombs. You could eat all those grains, especially the ones you mentioned in the first group, and grains are best eaten, because seeds are in G-bombs, nuts aren't in G-bombs, but I advocate nuts, especially walnuts and pistachio nuts. And there are a lot of foods that I eat all the time that are not in G-bombs. Fruits is not in G-bombs. Just because it's not in G-bombs doesn't mean I don't advocate eating it. It's just I want people to particularly focus on making sure they get even a little bit of mushrooms and a little bit of scallion, a little bit of onion, and a little bit of green cruciferous vegetable, and a little bit of flaxseed or chia seed. I want to make sure they include these things in their diet. That's what the purpose of that is, okay? But when you eat your grains, I want your grains to be in the intact form, not ground into a flour. Because even when you take a healthy grain and you grind it into a flour or a pastry flour, it's going to increase its glycemic load. So sprouted, intact is good, and sprouted is probably even better. But so the point is that it's not that I'm against grains, but I want them to be not the major source of calories in the diet, so you can have room in your diet to include all these foods you're supposed to be eating. So I don't want a grain-based diet. I want a vegetable-based diet. Number two, the grains that you do eat, you want them to choose the healthiest choices possible. Somebody could continue on that.
I'm happy to add, and I've created this thing for those of you that were at my lecture today called the whole grain hierarchy. And so we know refined grains you want to get out. Whole grains, you have to realize that there is various levels of processing of whole grains. And so the whole grains that are the most healthful is as they're picked off the plant, nothing added, nothing taken away, and they're eaten that way. And the very best would be sprouting them, because when you sprout them, you reduce anti-nutrients, you release stored forms of nutrients, you massively increase the phytochemical protective army of these protective chemicals. Yeah, exactly. And so you're doing a lot of wonderful things. But when you eat those grains intact, you can eat, a kamut berry salad or a quinoa, salad or something like that. Whereas when you turn them into flour, you don't need a bowl of flour. You're going to be adding fat and sugar and salt and all of these things to make that flour into whatever baked product or.
Bake it at high heat and you're going to acrylamide.
Exactly. All of those things. And so ideally you want to be sticking predominantly to intact grains. And most of the grains they eat are wheat. And so you want to mix up your grains. And just like every food category, you get different benefits from different types of grains. And some people, maybe 10% of the population don't do well with gluten-containing grains. And so the first category of grains works better for those people. I personally do eat some gluten-containing grains. I love kamut. I sprout it. I love having using barley, for example, in our Marshall Islands population, because it has the lowest glycemic index by far of any grain, and so it works well for people with diabetes if it's intact. So those are the kinds of issues that I would consider. And certainly whole grains are not as nutrient dense as beans and greens and these other foods. So the way that I explain it to people is you use grains. They're not necessary in the human diet. There's no nutrient from grains that you couldn't get from elsewhere, but they are a reasonable food to vary according to your energy needs. So if you're a senior woman who doesn't need a lot of calories, You eat your beans and greens and vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds, and whatever extra calories you need, you could throw in a few grains. For a triathlete who's burning 5,000 calories a day, they can afford more grains. So that's sort of the way that I would suggest doing it is based on your energy needs.